Hi, my name is Gibson, and I'm the owner and founder of the Personal Development School. This is your daily breakthrough video. Today we're going to talk a little bit about chronic fatigue or adrenal fatigue and sort of what the mental emotional basis of this might be. If you get a lot of value out of our videos, out of this series, please like them, share them, subscribe to our channel, and please check out www.personaldevelopmentschool.com. We've got lots of free content tools, and we're going to keep offering you personal development solutions for the subconscious mind. So today, let's talk a little bit about where chronic fatigue comes from at the root level, mentally and emotionally, okay, and how this is actually interacting with our physiology to produce a negative impact, let's say. So first and foremost, a lot of people, and I see a lot of clients who struggle with chronic fatigue, and their thoughts, one common pattern that is so clear to me is that their thoughts are exhausting. So they are constantly having self-judging thoughts, negative thoughts, fear-based thoughts, things that are like, I'm not doing enough, I don't have enough, I might fail, everybody's gonna judge me, what's wrong with me, I can't believe I'm not following through, I'm so tired, I'm so exhausted. And keep in mind that every thought we have elicits an emotional response. So if I have a thought, let's say I have 30 thoughts in a row about how I'm behind on things, I'm not meeting deadlines, people are probably judging me, my boss is gonna be upset, I never do enough, I might fail, I might lose my job. You know, let's say I have all these thoughts. All of these thoughts are eliciting an emotional response. And those emotional responses are made up of neurochemical reactions. So if I'm having a lot of thoughts that are fear-based and stress-based, those thoughts are eliciting neurochemical responses of cortisol and adrenaline and things that are actually going to wreak havoc on my sympathetic nervous system. I'm going to be so in fight or flight mode, so perpetually, that at some point my sympathetic nervous system is going to start being exhausted. And research shows we think roughly 60 to 70,000 thoughts per day. So if we have the vast majority of those thoughts that are based in fear and reinforcement of how tired we are and how things are so difficult, and there's such resistance-based thoughts, then we are going to be extremely tired. And we really don't realize until we change our thoughts at a root level and the emotional responses that, of course, are the output of those. We don't realize how much our thinking impacts our physiology and our emotions and our relationships, for that matter. But we want to start tuning in, like, can I change my thinking? And we are not our thoughts. Like, if I can see this marker, I'm obviously not this marker. If I can see my thinking, there's obviously an aspect of self that is able to observe those thoughts. And so we want to get sort of more rooted and relaxed into the observer self more often. Start connecting there. And out of that, we can start noticing the thoughts that no longer serve, and we can start substituting them and start breaking up these negative and exhausting thought patterns, kind of like scar tissue. And over time, as we habitually choose to do that and become more intentional about how we are thinking, that of course impacts the type and number of emotional responses that are elicited, which of course gives our parasympathetic nervous system a chance to kick in, which is our rest and digest mode, which gives us an actual opportunity to recharge. So if we're not doing this, if we are not in charge of our thinking at the root level, and because we have so many fear-based patterns or negative patterns that we collected from society or early childhood or different conditioning and experiences we had, then we will keep sort of running in the hamster wheel of things that keep us, you know, really adrenalized, but eventually just completely exhausted. So at the thought level, we want to be more aware. Keep in mind as well that your nervous system will habituate to things. So anything that we do perpetually, any thoughts we think perpetually, any emotions we feel perpetually, as long as we're surviving, our subconscious mind is like, okay, good, this is working. And it starts to make habits and patterns. Everything that fires perpetually, we just create a nice little neural pathway or a neural network, and we basically just keep keeping these things alive. And as long as we are doing that, our body starts to learn, okay, and it becomes automatic. Our body starts to show up as what we are thinking and feeling about. And then this makes it really real for us. So, you know, what the premise is, you could say, of chronic fatigue might not be real. So, meaning that let's say that some of my chronic fatigue triggering thoughts, some of the foundation of chronic fatigue is about how I'm going to fail, I'm not good enough, I'm going to end up on the street and be homeless if I don't make more money, if I don't, and some of those thoughts might not be valid. I might be believing thoughts all day because I'm identified with them that are reinforcing stories that could be an illusion. So, worst case scenario, I might have my husband or wife or children or people who can support me or help me out, and it may be a total myth that I would ever end up on the street. But as long as I'm automatically thinking those thoughts and I'm identified with them, then I'm automatically believing them and I'm automatically feeling accordingly. So, and those feelings, when perpetuated and recycled over and over again, and those thoughts then refeeding that cycle, even though the thoughts, that foundation of the cycle might not be completely valid, my body comes to believe that, to feel that way. It becomes a natural and habitual pattern. It's automatic. And then that sense of helplessness derived from my nervous system habituating to that pattern is completely debilitating and real. That is completely real and valid, even though the premise of what is creating some of that may not be. And keep in mind, I'm not saying that these are the only reasons for chronic fatigue. There's a lot of interesting research related to your gut health and so many physiological aspects. But these two aspects, the mental, emotional, and the physiological, are obviously very intertwined. And we're sort of focusing today here on the mental, emotional components of this so that you have some deeper insight into your subconscious and how you're showing up. So what comes out of this, and what's super important to recognize as well, is this sense of helplessness. Like, this victim mentality is born out of that. So if I'm constantly thinking fear-based and negative thoughts and constantly having these emotional responses, I feel like the victim of my reality. If I'm constantly fearing being homeless or out on the street or not being good enough or being shamed in front of everybody or a failure, or, even saying these thoughts now, I'm like, oh, I hope they're not programming me too much. Because thoughts matter. There's a great quote from A Course in Miracles that says, there are no idle thoughts. And every thought has a little bit of weight, and when we perpetuate those thoughts and the emotions that impact them, we program our own subconscious mind, because the subconscious mind is basically programmed through repetition plus emotion. So any repetitive, emotionally laced thoughts that we have, we create our own program. Our body and nervous system habituates to some of this programming, and then we just keep having this output that we feel like the victim of. We feel so helpless to this. And what happens when we start actually feeling chronic fatigue, when we actually start feeling the physiological result of some of this? Well, then we feel even more helpless and we feel even more victimized. So then we feed those thoughts even more, and it becomes this really intense, vicious cycle. So we want to start becoming aware and going inwards and checking in and seeing, like, what patterns of thinking am I feeding, and how can I create some change here to produce different results at the roots? Okay, how can I at least take charge completely of my mental, emotional faculties here that are co-creating or producing some of this pattern, okay? So, and again, like, just to make that really clear, that victim mentality, that is born out of some of those thoughts, and then that is also refed out of our feelings of exhaustion. Like, there's a great quote, I think it's Winston Churchill, and he says, fatigue makes cowards of us all. And I think everybody can relate to the fact that we get more and more tired, and we feel more like the victims when we are constantly exhausting ourselves. The more tired we are, the easier it is to think negative thoughts, fall back into negative patterns, eat unhealthy foods, all kinds of stuff. So we want to get in charge of this at the roots and start taking some of our power back instead of outsourcing it to all of our fear-based beliefs and paradigms. Here's another really interesting one that I see a lot in people who are struggling with chronic fatigue. There's almost a fear of relaxing. It's almost like they forget how to relax. It's like, again, that your nervous system becomes so habituated to this stress and pressure-oriented way of thinking and seeing the world, sort of like filtering it through that subconscious filter of perception, that we start sort of getting into this space where it's like, I can't relax now, I'm already so far behind. And we further use excuses that are essentially just keeping that entire paradigm alive. And so sometimes you'll see people who can't sit still, that struggle with chronic fatigue, or when they sit still, they're still thinking all these negative and fear-based thoughts. So even sitting still is exhausting them. They're never getting an actual chance to recharge. And a lot of the core wounds that come out of here, I often see that the core wounds with people struggling with chronic fatigue are either like a fear of loss or failure. Like, let's say you just started a new relationship or a new business or something you're really invested in, and you're so exhausted, but you're so afraid to just stop and pause and recharge because you're so afraid that the net result of that means that you'll lose time or money or all the effort you're putting in. And so there can be this fear there that then, like, even though you're exhausted, you just keep trying to push and outwill, and we really need to be able to just take it easy for a moment and actually, like, step behind everything we're doing, fall back into ourselves, get rooted a little bit more in our being energy and our passive energy and our ability to be flexible and to surrender a little bit more. And it's through that we recharge, because we stop applying this consistent and perpetual pressure on ourselves. And also a feeling of not good enough. A lot of people struggling with chronic fatigue have some kind of wound from childhood, I've noticed, where somebody or something really impactful or repetitive, again, because the repetition programs the subconscious mind and the impactful references the emotion. And emotion, it plays such an impact or role on our subconscious programming. So sometimes we'll have something really strong there, and that's created this whole feeling of not good enough, and our conscious mind is all the time trying to run from our subconscious wounds. Oh, sorry, one second. And so what we really want to do is tune into this and start learning how to relax, start learning how to release some of these fear-based patterns, not being good enough, and sort of how this is impacting our nervous system and our body's responses. So keep in mind that oftentimes, so sort of referencing that example of how somebody can be struggling with chronic fatigue, all of these really negative fear-based sort of thoughts, be sitting down trying to relax, but they're still thinking about how they're not doing enough, and when are they going to get energy back, and when are they going to this, that, and they can be exhausting themselves just by sitting, right? So it's not so much what you're doing as it is how you're showing up through what you're doing. So if I'm, grocery shopping, but I'm thinking of the 60 other things that I have to do and hurry up, and I'm falling behind, and I have to hurry through the grocery shopping, and I have an entire half hour of grocery shopping that's exhausting my nervous system, that's stressing my body and even impacting my immune system, of course, to some degree. So if I hold that next to, if I'm grocery shopping, but I'm like really rooted and calm, and I'm being a little bit mindful, and I'm with myself, and I'm not rushing, and I'm being present, and I'm enjoying looking at different foods and how they could nourish my body. And if I'm approaching that activity from that space, it's more like how I'm being in grocery shopping, that I could be recharged through grocery shopping, or then I could actually sit down and meditate and be recharged. If I sit down and meditate and I'm like, this is another activity that I have to do, and I have 15 minutes, and when the alarm goes off, I'll go on to these other 17 things that I have to do on my to-do list, and I hope I can get them all done before bed. If I'm coming from that space, even meditation is not recharging. Nothing is recharging except the way that you are showing up in the activity that you're doing. And maybe that's not an absolute truth, but it's definitely a really important pattern to pay attention to. How are you being in what you are doing? And next, a great thing if you're struggling with like where to start, like I can't even, do that. I don't even know how to recharge and be calm because maybe I'm so addicted to these thought patterns. Keep in mind as well that some of these thought patterns will also produce a dopamine response, which can be highly addictive. And it's just all these little microdoses, these tiny, tiny little microdoses of dopamine sort of happening with every fear-based or stress-based thought that we're having. So a great way to start is intentionally set aside time for recharging. So don't just sit there and say, okay, I'm going to meditate for 20 minutes and it's on, then I've got all these other things to get to on my to-do list. But maybe at the end of the day or the beginning of the day is way better, or at parts throughout your day, tell yourself, like, I am going to do away with all of my thoughts for this 30 minutes, or I am going to focus just on things that are truly recharging me. And if I feel a thought come in or a fear come in, or an old pattern come in that's pushing me and worrying and creating more stress, I'm just going to release it. I'm going to intentionally create time just to be. And this is going to be my time not to sit there and stress about anything else, but to be as present as I can in this moment. And if you're not familiar, mindfulness is a great place to start. And there are tons of, if you Google mindfulness, there's tons of resources and information online about practicing mindfulness. And this can be very helpful as well if you're that addicted to some of these patterns. And lastly, and this is obviously something I mention quite often, is change your thoughts, okay? Since the subconscious mind is programmed through repetition and emotion, we got these negative patterns or fear-based patterns through repetition and emotion, which means we can, through a commitment to repetitively changing our thinking into thoughts or patterns that produce more positive or relaxing emotional responses, through doing this, we can uproot that entire foundation through which the mental and emotional components of chronic fatigue are built upon in the first place. And, yes, it does take commitment and it does take consistency. But keep in mind that it takes a lot more commitment and consistency to be exhausted all the time when you're just on autopilot committed to your negative thought patterns. So if you catch yourself thinking thoughts throughout the day that are exhausting you or worrying, maybe just write a list of the things you have to do and just put some ease and flow into it. Like, I'm going to get to these things as best I can, when I can. I'm going to ask for help or support if I can, but I'm not going to be sitting here holding space for these negative patterns to just keep being fed and flourishing and thriving. And this will be a really, really fantastic way to deal with some of this stuff at the root level, at least on the mental emotional scale. So I hope you got a lot out of this video. If you have questions or comments, or you notice some patterns that describe you in here, please connect, please ask questions, and please feel free to share any future videos that you want to see up here, and I will absolutely respond to this, and we'll get some of these videos out. So feel free to like, share, subscribe, and check out www.personaldevelopmentschool.com.